books like James are problematic for a lot of pastors. Matter of fact, my dad would tell you a story about a pastor that he met that admitted that he wished that he could rip the book of James out of the Bible because when it comes to subjects like Torah observance, it is inherently problematic for a lot of Christian doctrine concerning obedience to God's commandments. And the nature of the relationship that faith and works have with one another. And the book of James makes that problematic. And so it's understandable why, if there was a reorganization of the books of the Bible, why James would be closer to the end of the book after the epistles. But yeah, there doesn't need to be a willingness to talk about Paul necessarily. It's just proper. It's proper to read through the teachings of Jesus before we get to Paul. I don't see that as being a point of willingness. Again, like I said, there are any number of us in the ministry who are willing to discuss the epistles, but I'm going to spearhead with the words of the Messiah himself. Why? Because he was the Messiah. If I cite the words of the Messiah and what I'm met with in argumentation is the words of Paul, we've got a problem, because at this point, one is pitting Paul against Jesus. And I understand some of my Christian brothers and sisters have a problem with this, because they would say that I am pitting the words of Jesus against Paul, and I think that that's a premise problem. And Matt Walsh, actually, a political commentator for the Daily Wire that I listen to a lot, he has actually discussed this on his show before, where a lot of evangelical Christianity, it's like they lean entirely too hard on the words of Paul, especially when Jesus says something about the nature of works and how that pertains to one's faith walk. That is a little hard to reconcile internally. Boom, out comes the book of Romans. That's a problem, because you're not really explaining what Jesus said. You are trying to disprove what Jesus said using the words of Paul, and that's a problem. That's not something we as believers should be doing. If anything, we should be trying to reconcile the words of Paul so that they match what Jesus said, because what Jesus said was to the common folk. It was for common people to understand. It was earlier in the video we established what Paul wrote was for scholars to understand, being that it's predominantly being spoken from a Pharisaic point of view, which is why he always sent his letters with a rabbi. Some may say he sent them with a lawyer or what have you, but that he sent them with a Torah teacher, okay, someone who had mastered the instruction of the Torah, so that that person could explain the letter to the congregation. He didn't send the letter and just let the letter explain itself. And so these are important things and important points that I think the church does need to wrestle with. Do we lean too hard on Paul? Because that would be problematic if that were the case.